Well, a hearty welcome to everyone. I'm Jack Widness. I'm from the Connecticut River Valley chapter, and we've met maybe 4 years in a row on this
hmm
with our three chapter meeting.
Yeah.
Um, Before we got started with this, we tried to do an in-person meeting, and it was going to be in Reedsboro, sort of a centrally located place, but there was a snowstorm or something that came up. Maybe it was even COVID. I think it was COVID. So we gave up on that. And then it's so hard to travel in the wintertime that this just seems like the best way to do something if you're going to plan something in the evening in February. So I'm glad we were able to settle on this, and it's been a fun event in past years, and I'm sure it will be today as well. So the plan for this evening, we've got each of the three chapters. We're going to divide our evening up so that they'll each have 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll have some Q&A for each one of the chapters. I've also invited, can someone mute? We also have had the good fortune of Lyle Will, who's with us tonight. Um, and she's going to talk a little bit about what's new in her world and things that are going on there. And I think that's about it. Seth Berger has to go early, so I think we'll just go ahead and start with Seth, if that's all right. Does anyone have any other announcements or anything you want to say before we get started here, or have any questions about the evening? We're also going to introduce our guides if some of them have joined us. I forgot to mention that. Going once, going twice. Okay, Seth,
All
take it
right. Thanks,
away.
Jack. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Awesome. Well, it's good to see those of you that I know and meet those of you that I don't. I'm Seth Berger. I'm the president of the Southwestern Vermont chapter. And I will run you through kind of some highlights of what we did last year, what we have planned for this year, as well as some of the work that Jacob Fetterman's been doing in our region. And I'll try and share my screen with you. So let's see if that'll work. All right. Can you guys all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And the presentation. Can you see the presentation that's up there?
Yeah.
All
Yes.
right. Awesome. So I ran through this at our annual meeting last month. Figured it was a good way to go through it here. So I can't see all of you. So if you have questions as I go through it, please just chime in and ask away. So last year, we were doing an event that we called Trout on Tap. We did it in 2023 as well. Initially, it started off really well attended, and then attendance waned a bit. So we stopped doing it, but it was just a way to get people together in the non-fishing months once a month. And so we'd move it around throughout Bennington and Rutland County, and usually have somewhere between 8 and 10 people there. This one was down at Ramunto's in Bennington. So that was fun. Unfortunately, like I said, people stopped coming, so we stopped doing it, but it might be something we start up again. And then, we did Trout in the classroom. I think we had 22 schools that we were working with this year, so that was awesome. In April, we did a river cleanup on the Walloomsac. I don't have my notes from the annual meeting here, but we picked up somewhere around 650 pounds of trash. Casella was nice enough to donate a dumpster, and Dunkin' Donuts gave us some donuts. So we had 10 or 11 people show up, and that was a pretty good haul that we got there. In May, many of you probably came over for the TU Rendezvous in conjunction with the Bat and Kill Fly Fishing Festival. So that was a great event for us. We did a tree planting along with those two events on the Sunday on Union Street in Manchester, which I'll go into more in depth. But we also did some classes teaching kids about bugs and casting lessons, that kind of stuff. And so at the tree planting, we had about 20 people there. We planted over 500 trees, which was the second planting we've done at this location. A couple years ago, we planted about 150 trees. And we started planting trees here because there was a bank failure about 200 feet of the bank started to fall into the river. And so it's an area here in Manchester that we've been focusing on and done a number of projects on. and I'll touch on those in a second as well. In August, we did what we called Trees for Trout, and that was another project here at the same site that we planted the trees during the festival. You can see here, this is where the bank initially started to fail. This picture, I took it in 2022, I believe, maybe even 2021. So that's when it first started to fail. And we originally put in actually 12 trees here that I got that were left over from Jim Henderson at the Bennington County Conservation Commission. I think that's right. So we put a dozen trees in here, then 150, and now we've planted everything you can see in this picture, and I'll show you an aerial photo in a minute as well. So this is what the bank used to look like, and here you can see some of the great work this Trees for Trout program was able to do here. So this 200-foot section of the bank, what these are is we collected Christmas trees last winter. We tried to get about 60 of them. We ended up with 100, which was a good problem to have. And those trees, they got bundled together in groups of 2 and 3, then put into the bank where it was failing. And then you can see the stakes that are holding them in place. So the hope there is that with the trees that we've planted in the ground up above them, and with the dead Christmas trees that we've rooted into the bank, that it'll give it time for those trees that we've planted to set some roots and stabilize the bank a bit. And then eventually these Christmas trees and the stakes will probably rot out and head on downstream. And we're doing that program again this year with Jacob Fetterman's help down in Sunderland on the Green River. So we've got all the trees collected, and those will get put in the river probably in August, around the same time they were this past year. In the fall, we wrapped up year 1 of a study that we started on the Walloomsac, and I'll dive. Oh, here's some more pictures from the tree planting. So about 500 trees for that one, and then Jacob organized some more tree plantings throughout the area. This was that rainy Sunday after the festival, which was actually made for a pretty good day to plant trees. Ground was nice and soft, so that helped. And then, so here's an aerial photo of that area. So you can see here where the bank was failing, and those Christmas trees got put in from the upstream end all the way up a little bit past where you can see these bushes all the way down to the bend in the river. And this whole area that you see here is now full of young trees that we've planted. So they go a little bit more upstream, a little bit wider towards the bottom of your screen, but pretty good area there that we've covered. And here's a couple other pictures of it just about a week before. That's what the bank looked like, and then that same picture I shared earlier. So with the Walloomsac program, I'm going to skip this slide real quick. This will give you a timeline. So back in February, we applied for a grant from Vermont Fish and Wildlife. We got approval in March. In May, we installed these what we call hobo monitors. They're temperature monitors for the river. Throughout the summer, 2 of our board members, Bonnie Daly and Elliot Davis, they performed water quality testing. So nothing too high tech, but did some testing on the water there in September, did a macroinvertebrate survey, and then in October, those hobo monitors were picked up and we retrieved the data from them. So they were logging temperature data throughout the entirety of the summer. We put 5 of them in place, and 1 of them seems to have disappeared, but we got 4 of them, which was pretty good. And on the next slide here, you'll see the ones that we did get. This Hinsville one disappeared on us, but the other ones, you can see that the temperatures, although they did get a little bit high, as maximum temperatures, the mean temps throughout the summer were pretty good, which we were happy to see. So it's good signs for the Walloomsac. Also with the water quality we were doing, so this is kind of shows you what how we were testing it with a little dipstick that would then read out, nitrite and nitrate levels. We tested 4 sites for 6 weeks. Here's the various things that we tested for. And overall, it was pretty good. So it wasn't. We're going to do some more testing this year, a little bit more scientific, sending out some water quality, some water samples to do quality testing. But overall, we were really happy and excited to see that the Williamsack's probably doing better than most people would think. And then in the fall, we did a little bit of a survey, floated the river, covered 6 miles of it just to check for all kinds of things like invasive species, potential bank failures, just barriers that might be in the river, all that kind of stuff. And we're able to map that. And so you can see here where these different points mean different things in terms of it might be identifying a tire that's in the river or an area where the bank may be failing and there could be an opportunity for us to do a project there. So we have this data to go back on this spring and summer and make some more plans to do stuff there. So. And so then here's just a little bit of the macro invertebrate survey that we did. We did 2 locations for that. Found all kinds of great bug life, mayflies, stoneflies, caddis. There were a couple invasive species, but overall pretty good. And then for 2025, here's kind of our schedule of what we'll be doing on the Williamsack again. And so with the success that we've seen there or kind of the momentum that we've got from the Williamsack survey, we're going to look to do a second site up in Rutland County on Tenny Brook and do the same thing. So this summer we'll be installing the hobo monitors, or in the spring we'll do the hobo monitors. In the summer we'll do some water quality testing, and then we'll do some macroinvertebrate surveys as well, both on both rivers. So for 2025, we've come up with a goal of trying to raise $25,000 this year. With that, we'll be able to fund various projects that we're hoping to do. The Williamsack study, there's a project going on on a tributary of the Battenkill on Murray Hollow. That's pretty exciting. So there's a culvert on there that will be coming out this summer. I was talking with Jacob Fetterman about it today, and he hopes the work will start on June 15th and should wrap up by August 1st. And he sent me some pictures of it. Let me see if I can bring those over. Can you guys see this? All right, awesome. So here's Murray Hollow. So this is the culvert that will be replaced there. This is a dirt road. You actually access it from the New York side, but the stretch is in Vermont. And so this is what the culvert currently looks like. And here's what it will hopefully look like after. So that's a pretty big and exciting project that we're gonna we are gonna be a part of. We have some money that's earmarked for that, and part of our fundraising will go towards that as well. We'll also have a couple of winter events. So coming up in a couple weeks, Peter Kamen, he's an author. His most recent book is called The Flies Are Too Damn Small. He'll be coming to Manchester, and he'll be doing a little book talk, and we'll have a little social event there. On March 26th, we're the Green Mountain Fly Tires, who are up in Rutland. They have a pretty strong membership base. We'll be doing a collaborative event or evening with them at their meeting and talking about some of the work we've been doing on the Williamsack as well as on Tenny Brook and what we have planned for this year elsewhere. And then in early April, we don't have the date set yet, but we'll be doing a panel discussion on flood resiliency, floodplain, those kinds of things. I believe Aaron will be joining us for that. So more to come there. We'll also probably be doing another river cleanup in April like we did on the Williamsack. We might be down there again. It might be elsewhere. Still kind of the poll is out on where our chapter members want to see that take place. So more details to come there. In early May, we have Battenkill Fly Fishing Festival again. Hope to see some of you at that. We'll be there with our tent and be doing a tree planting at the end of the weekend, as we did this past year. As I mentioned earlier, we collected Christmas trees again this year. So those will be going in August. And then at the end of the year, we'll wrap up year 2 of our Walloon Sack study, as well as Tenny Brook. So that's what I got there.
Wow. Certainly been quite busy. How about
Yeah.
questions that any of the audience might have of Seth? Well, while you're
Seth,
thinking, go ahead.
um, hi, I'm Leah Will, fisheries biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. I'll be updating folks later. I was just wondering, for the Walloon Sack study, collecting all the data, kind of what's the end goal? Are you just wanting to have more information about the health of it, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we went into it very open-ended, just to see what's going on down there. Some people think the William Sack's great. Some people think it's really gross and dirty, and that there aren't any. It's not worth going there. And so we just wanted to study the river, and try and get a baseline for what the health of it is. We in the fall when we floated it, we saw a number of reds, which was really exciting. So maybe there's potential for it to be a wild fishery and not be stocked. Who knows? But it's really the goal was to just get an understanding and a baseline for what the river is like, because when we talk to a lot of our chapter members, a lot of what we hear is you guys are very bat and kill focused. We'd love to see you give some love to the Walloon Sack. And so we said, great, let's go see what it needs. So the idea was just year 1, get a baseline, year 2, refine the testing a little bit and see if maybe there's something that needs to be done. But if at the end of year 2, we find more of what we found in year 1, which is the river's actually in really good shape, and it's cleaner than you might think. And there's certainly plenty of trash to be picked up, but if overall it's in pretty good shape, then we can focus our efforts elsewhere.
Thanks.
Yep.
So, Seth, I was wondering about your April cleanup. This is in Vermont or in New York that you're doing the cleanup?
Yeah, it would be in Vermont.
Okay.
Yeah, so last year we did it just outside of Bennington on the Walloon Sack. Well, I guess technically in Bennington, and it'll be somewhere in southwestern Vermont.
So my question is, Vermont has its Green Up Day is the first Saturday in May. And have you ever contemplated collaborating with them? Maybe they could help with some of the pickup of trash along the rivers, because rivers usually go along where roads are. Is that something you've ever considered, or?
Yeah, I think in the past we've done that. The reason we did an early April cleanup last year, we looked to do it the first weekend. It ended up being the second because of a snowstorm. And people were telling us that they wanted to get out on the river early in April. So I think that's why we did it. And we got some people to show up, so that was great. And I think, if we can get a jump start on it, why not?
Sure. Yeah. How about other questions or comments from the Southeastern chapter that you'd want to highlight or add to what Seth had to say?
Yeah, could I ask about the fundraising?
Sure.
You want to raise $25,000 this current year. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, so we're starting to do a little bit of an outreach program with local businesses in Southwestern Vermont, looking for them to be kind of sponsors of our chapter. So with that, they'd get a little window decal that just says, we're proud to support Southwestern Vermont Trout Unlimited. That could be a big part of it. Hopefully that'll be a big chunk of it. We're talking to individuals as well. And our treasurer would certainly be able to go into more depth about specific line items. But I know the culvert replacement on Murray Hollow is a big one. The Trout in the Classroom program, we're anticipating a good chunk of money that we're going to have to spend there, with classrooms that have equipment that's quite old and will need to be replaced. And then with our other efforts, be it cleanups, tree plantings, those kinds of things, that's where the money will end up going. But last year, I think we spent around, I think $8,000 through various programs and things that we were doing. So rather than continue to eat into the money that we have in the bank, we're looking to raise a good chunk this year.
So primarily by outreaching individuals or corporations or?
But both, yeah. So local businesses and local, individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Seth, do you have any of your guides do you want to introduce or want to introduce themselves that want to say a few words?
I don't see any on here, but if I'm missing them and they're on there, by all means, please speak up.
If not, can I chime in one more time?
Sure.
Sorry. You invited me. So going back to your where you had the Christmas trees and the planting on the Bat and Kill, when I just something to consider when I look at that aerial, to me it looks like the channel is bending and making an adjustment in that location. And don't get me wrong, like we totally support tree plantings and all of that. A lot of times when we see these channel adjustments, it's oh, the bank is failing, and then we want to sort of protect that by bank stabilization. But a lot of times our river scientists want those channels to meander and sort of sort themselves out before we do tree plantings, because we want those meander bends in the river. It's something I fight with the stream engineers, river management engineers, of the channel's moving, we don't want it to move, so let's try and make it not move. But by not letting it move, kind of you're going backwards in time, because that's what starts that whole process of shunting that energy somewhere else. So I fully support everything you guys are doing. It's just when I look at that picture, it's like, oh, well, the channel's adjusting. It's trying to bend there, and let's let it bend and then go in and plant trees. Just something to think about for
Thanks.
these
Yeah,
sites.
that's good.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about the Southwest's presentation or of Seth?
Just want to say nice job, Seth.
Right.
Yeah, nice
Thank you,
job,
Eric.
Seth.
Thanks.
So as we move ahead, let me just ask any of the speakers, Eric or Aaron or Lyle, do any have to leave early so that we should put you in right now?
I'm good.
Aaron, you okay? Well, maybe she'll come back. So Lyle, why don't we go ahead and have you step in here and give us an update. I've given you co-host, so you should be able to show things if you wish, but you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, so my plan for tonight was just to give a 10-minute update on some of the activities happening in our district. I did not put together a PowerPoint presentation, and I want to leave space for questions. And if I can't answer your question because I don't know all the answers to everything, I'll probably follow up with Jack afterwards to make sure that your questions are answered. But just briefly, my name is Leah Will. I'm a fisheries biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife. I've been working for the department since 2012. We are district-based, so there are 5 districts within our state. Our district covers the Black, West Williams, Saxtons, Deerfield, Bat and Kill, and I also work a lot on the Connecticut River dealing with migratory fishes. So within those districts, we cover everything. Permit review, monitoring, restoration, all that good stuff is our responsibility. So just a couple of highlights that I've been working on within my district. So that's District 1. And I also work with Courtney Buckley, who is the co-biologist within the district, and she primarily focuses on the bat and kill. But I also help do work over there for our annual monitoring. So I'll just briefly touch on a few things. This year, we are starting a pilot study. This was something that was actually brought up by an angler. So back in 2022, we had a bunch of ponds that were historically not open to harvest in the winter. These were small put and take ponds. The idea was to protect the wild trout, but a lot of these ponds don't have wild trout. They are stocked fisheries. And back in 2022, we revised our fishing regulations, which allowed a lot of these ponds to be opened up to harvest. So primarily we stock in the springtime, and we stock everything in the spring. And then if there's holdover fish, those fish would be available for the winter fishery. So what I did this year is got 4 ponds. So there's Shaftesbury, Perrin over in your neck of the woods, and then the Knapp ponds over in Reading. Instead of stocking 100% of the fish in the spring, I held back some. About 17% of the yearlings that would have been stocked in that pond got held back. So it was about 500 fish per pond. We let them grow throughout the summertime, and then we stocked them in the fall. So the goal with this was to reinvigorate the fishery without adding more fish. It was simply reallocating those fish to the fall. So to get anglers excited about fishing out there, there's no concerns with wild fisheries or anything like that. But we wanted to do outreach and make sure that people are actually fishing and catching fish. So I started that this year, and we'll be doing it again next year. So trying to get the word out to people that that these fish will be available. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback. It's just with climate change, some of these ponds are getting too warm in the summertime. So rather than cutting stocking, it's more shifting stocking to the fall. So those fish would be available in the fall, catch and release after November 1. When harvest opens back up January 1, they can then harvest those fish. So it's really getting people to enjoy the fishery outside of the summertime. Folks may know that we do a lot of annual monitoring. In our district, we have about 21 sites that I do every year. Some of these sites, we've got 40 years worth of data, so we can really track how trout populations are faring through time. And these are focused on our wild trout fisheries, not stocked fisheries. On top of that, for each one of those sites, I also install the same HoboWare loggers that Seth was talking about. We take hourly readings, and so I can really track, temperatures and how trout are responding through time, concurrently with, what's happening with climate change, the drought, the floods, really tracking that through time so that I know, which sites are doing okay and which ones aren't. And that really helps us prioritize and focus our efforts. For example, like the Whetstone used to be really good brown trout populations, and I'm seeing a significant decline. And we'll know through time, does it bounce back or not? But I am seeing along the lines with like the bank stabilization areas that have been rip-wrapped, we're losing that velocity refuge that fish really rely on during these flood events. So when you don't have that velocity refuge, you tend to lose fish, and if they can't recolonize, that's when you start seeing declines. So we were able to go out again this year. David Ween, I don't know if he's on the call tonight, but he's always anxious for the reports. All of those reports are online now, so the public can go straight online and get all that information, and you have exactly what I have in front of me for making management decisions. Every 10 years, we have our wildlife action plan update. And for you guys, the focus for that would be our brook trout. They're a species of greatest conservation need. I am working with a group right now to update that state wildlife action plan, which I believe would go out for public comment at some point. It is a public document, and it's really focused on our work and our management for these species of greatest conservation need that include brook trout. I'm also got tapped to help. Well, I like writing about fish, so I kind of asked to do this, but we're going to be updating our Fishes of Vermont book. So that was like published in the mid 90s. It's due for an update, especially some of those distribution maps. We know fish distribution has changed. So I'll be working on updating that book. So I'm really excited about that. I know folks are probably curious about the chatterings about the Salisbury hatchery potentially closing. What I can tell you right now is very brief, that it is funded through 2026. Our DEC permit, our discharge permit for that facility is good through 2027. So it looks like we're okay in the near future. Dylan Sickles is really the lead on talking to the legislature about that. So any other specific questions for Salisbury, I would probably defer over to Dylan. Some interesting things about our Eagle Lake. I know you guys probably know a lot about our Eagle Lake strain evaluation. For those of you that don't know, we are looking at a potential different rainbow trout strain that has the ability to hold over better than our Irwin R. Lee strain. So Lee Samard up in the Essex, he's our trout lead, has really focused on that evaluation. What we were trying to look at are, the catchability, or is one strain more catchable than the other strain. So we're doing a lot of creel surveys. We've got a online tool that anglers can report to. So that's been in the works for the past couple years now. But there are issues at the hatchery end that are lending themselves to some uncertainty as to whether or not we're going to proceed with the Eagle Lake. Number one is frunculosis, which is a bacterial infection that can wipe out all your fish. And it's a serious infection that they've been battling at the hatchery. And they're concerned that with the frunculosis, it could set back their hatchery production like 2 decades. Because they've had it in the past, they got it under control, and now it's popping back up again with this new strain. So we don't want to have our other fish get sick. They're working on potential a vaccine for it, but I guess it just depends on how much effort they want to put into a new strain, given the catchability seems to be very similar between the two. Secondly, they're having issues with the triploid process. So triploid is a process that sterilizes your eggs. It happens right after the eggs are fertilized. They go into a high pressure tank, which basically sterilizes them. And they've been having issues on that route. So those are 2 big things that I think need to get sorted out with the hatcheries before we would move over to that strain. So stay tuned for that. Also appreciate everyone's work reporting and giving us feedback. David Ween's been really great in that respect. So I will stop there. 50% of my time is spent on migratory fish, and I'm happy to talk about migratory fish. But this is trout, so I will not bother you with that unless you want to hear about it. That's it.
So let's come up with some questions that you might have.
I guess I sort of have a loaded question. There's been a controversy in our side of the border on the Deerfield River in terms of stocking over wild fish and the issue of stopping stocking completely. And I sort of perused the Vermont sort of policy on wild fish, and it seemed like angling pressure on populations was one of the criteria, and there are different criterias for evaluating when stocking occurs and when it doesn't occur, and stocking over wild fish, and whether or not there's a viable population of wild fish that would satisfy angling pressure. So I guess my question to Lael is, I guess what's the basis for that in science? Have you gone out and done work studying the effect of stocking over wild trout and the interactions of stocked fish and wild trout in Vermont?
Well, I'll start from the beginning. Before we stock a water body, we go out and sample that water body. And like I had mentioned earlier, we have some of our sites we have a lot of data for. So we don't want to stock, and it's primarily for our brook trout, our native brook trout, of making sure that they have a home and that there's no competition, which is why we do the triploid as well, because we don't want them breeding. So I feel like Vermont's very conservative in that respect. We know, um, looking back in the papers in the past, that there can be competition for habitat, and food is a big one as well. The buggers got to eat. So that is why, we have our quintessential brook trout. Let's do what we can to make sure that they have the food and the habitat and aren't competing with hatchery fish. So before we stock, we will go out and do assessments, and a lot of it is we'll look at the habitat as well. So we don't want to stock where the fish are just going to get blown out and not be there anyway. So we do want to have some habitat. But what ends up happening once you start funneling that down, it ends up becoming like our main stem rivers that are very warm. Like the Black River, is a very popular fishery. We've done temperature monitoring. It gets 90 degrees in the summertime. So there's not the wild fish. It gets too warm, and you have good access. So that's the other criteria that's in our trout management plan, is we're not going to go stock someone's backyard stream that they only have access to. We want to make sure that the public has access. We want those fish to be pulled out. These are put and take fisheries. We put the fish in, you take them out. It's not a restoration stocking. We're not trying to supplement. It's basically patching these stocked fisheries in where the wild fish aren't, but where anglers have access to. Then we go back and we make sure that people are actually fishing for them. So this was the case on the Green River, where after Tropical Storm Irene, it was blown out, hogged out, channelized, and we weren't seeing any more pressure. There was no fishing pressure there. So we went and did 2 years worth of surveys. We're not stocking it. No one's fishing it. So stop stocking it. And so then we have sort of the data to back up our decision making. Is it perfect? No. There's some work that still needs to be done with a lot of, in particular over in District 2, with doing these fishing pressure surveys to say, if we're putting fish in, are people fishing for them? Are they taking them out? Because it's a waste of resources. It's very expensive. 60% of our budget goes to the hatchery. So we don't want to put fish in if they're not being utilized. Judd Kratzer's up in District 5. We just had a call today where it's like he's worried about the loons eating them, and we don't want to put a bunch of fish in if the loons are eating them. So he wants to bump up the size so that we're not just feeding the loons. So we have these discussions once a year, and we continue to fine tune things. And I think that's where we get clever with, the fall stocking of, we're not adding more fish. We're just spreading them out a little bit more. I can't speak to what Massachusetts does, but I do know that Vermont is taking several pathways to ensure that our wild trout, brook trout in particular, aren't being impacted by the stocked fishery.
I guess it's a little more complex for us because brook trout are indigenous fish, but the wild trout that a lot of people favor on our side of the border are brown trout, which essentially came from stocked fish that were stocked years and years ago and found a way to reproduce in the rivers. So that becomes a more complicated issue when you have these small populations of self-producing fish and then having a mix of stocked fish put in over them. I guess that's the complexity of the issue.
Right. And it's, Massachusetts, we manage for brown trout. We have limits. And we do lump them in, like we don't stock the bat and kill because, and it's mostly, it's a mix of brook and brown. But when we're looking at do we want to add more fish on top of that? We lump it together, our non-natives and our natives. So we don't discern between that, but we certainly don't want our brown trout and rainbow trout. Like our rainbow trout are also triploid in the streams because for the same reason. So yeah, I guess it just depends on how Massachusetts wants to manage their naturalized non-native species.
So I'm going to step in here. Christopher, that's a great question. It's very complex, but as you heard from Lyle, she has got great knowledge in that. So one of the plugs I want to put in is if you'd like to have a truly great speaker that will draw the crowds, Lyle will be one that you should think about inviting to another meeting. But I think we need to move it along. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
You're sick of hearing from me already.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay.
So, Lael,
So-
I have a quick question
All right.
related to my presentation tonight.
Yeah.
We're really interested in a wild rainbow population, and we did a study I'm going to talk about, and I won't get into that now, but I'm curious about you. Do you see wild rainbows in southern Vermont?
That's a good question. Yes, but I think it's going to be one of those things that like the state of New Hampshire stocked historically, because where we see them is when they come in from the Connecticut River main stem to spawn in those tributaries, like Morse Brook. There's rainbows in there. But I think the adults are more or less, rearing in the main stem, and it's questionable, like, are those coming from New Hampshire stocking and kind of just are doing their thing in the main stem and then use the tribs to spawn in. But we do have in-stream work windows to protect the rainbow trout as well. You'd probably have to do a little genetic assessment to determine, are those wild rainbows coming in? Are they remnant from the New Hampshire Fish and Game stocks, the main stem Connecticut with rainbow trout? We do not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation, and I'm always we've had this conversation before, you and I. I admire the kind of work that you put in and your other biologists in using science to inform all your policies. It's really good. It's
Yep.
admirable.
Thank you.
And I've read your plan. I'm anxious to see how you update it, but it looks really good.
The Wildlife Action Plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we added a bunch of species, so it's been a lot of work, but gotta protect our critters.
So I wonder with that, Aaron, if it'd be all right if we just continued with Eric, since he's got some data that follows on his last question. Would that be all right with you?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so Eric, why don't you take it away? You've got co-hosting abilities if you'd like to share anything.
All right. I'm gonna share, and I need to find. This is funny. I'm not seeing. Let me just go to. There we go. Try this. And then see if I can get to the. Okay, let me see if I can get to this here. All right. Thanks, everybody. And actually, I want to just very quickly welcome Justin Adkins from the Taconic chapter. It's nice to see you here, Justin. Also, Andy Levchuk, Chris Van Deersen, Neil Anderson, Zane Patry, Gary Crago, and Tom Nichols all joined us after I had a chance to welcome you. So welcome all. I'm going to talk real quickly about things that we did last year, but I want to really focus on this rainbow study that we did. So very quickly, we advocated for wild trout management area on the upper Deerfield. We did some tree planting on the Bear River. We have a trout spotters program that we started. It's a pilot to use photographs to identify individual trout. We did flies, pies, and lies, our single fly. It's our annual events. We do an annual casting rendezvous. We have been doing water quality monitoring at 12 locations throughout the watershed. We put on a science summit on the Deerfield, and unfortunately, Leelle couldn't get to it, but we were hoping to get her roped in on that one. We had an annual dinner. We had Helen Neville there, TU's Nationals senior scientist, and she spoke about her work in genetics and some of the other work that's going on. She tries to coordinate the national citizen science efforts that are being done all over the country. And our brook trout habitat enhancement program on Rice Brook, we're following up and we're monitoring that closely to see how our habitat is improving that population. And then we support our partners at USGS with a brook trout temperature tolerance study. It's a really interesting study. I'll have a little bit more on that at the end of this. But the wild rainbow study is what I'd like to talk to you about, and that is a DNA study. The way that it evolved in March of 21, we talked to some of the ecologists over at USGS, Matt O'Donnell, Ben Letcher. We wanted to kind of extend our telemetry study. We had just done a telemetry study of brown trout, and it was very successful, but we wanted to use those skills and apply them to our population of wild rainbows. The USGS guys suggested that we really need to develop a better understanding of our wild population of rainbows before we try to figure anything else out. And so just being able to establish that there is a wild population, what their relationship is to the hatchery fish, and whatever else we could get. So we kind of designed this pilot study. And for funding, because it's not inexpensive to do genetic testing, we put together a proposal for an Embrace Stream grant. And thanks to the wise people over at Embrace Stream National, including Ellen, we were awarded that grant. And so that took a big chunk of the cost, took on a big chunk of the cost. And then the Mass Council for us has a cold water fisheries grant program. We applied for that 2 years in a row and were awarded a few $1,000s towards this effort. And then the picture that you see here is Kevin Kaminsky. He's a guy who really took the lion's share of work when we had our telemetry study, our brown trout telemetry study, when COVID hit. And so we nominated him for a Spirit of TU award. He won the award. He got a few dollars from Trout Unlimited National, and it had to be put into one of our projects. He dedicated it to our wild rainbow DNA study. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago on a trip to Labrador. And then there were just hundreds of volunteers hours, probably thousands, but I haven't tallied those volunteer hours yet. We have to get our EAS grant report in. The method was we electroshocked the tributaries with our partners, Adam Kalza he's a cold water fisheries biologist at Mass Fish and Wildlife, and Mike Hayden, who's a field biologist for USGS and a PhD candidate. And we employed USGS procedures for collecting and documenting fin samples. We expanded the method later because we wanted to get anglers involved. And so we angled for the fish, and it was a real popular, as you can imagine, it was a very popular addition to the project. We had many people involved in that. They were given a brief orientation, a fin sampling kit, and a list of kind of marching orders on how to conduct themselves. Each coin envelope after that, and this was in the case of all of the fins that we collected, we marked on the spot with date, approximate fork length, and in the case of those caught on the fly, it was the angler's name, but also information about weight if we could get it, and maybe some incidental information besides that. And then we sampled hatchery fish. Some people thought that maybe we were trying to discriminate between the hatchery fish that were in the wild and in the fish that were the wild fish. So we didn't have to do that because we got support from Kelb Slater, who directs the Massachusetts hatcheries, and we sampled about 100 fins from fall and spring stocking rainbows, as well as browns and brookies that were from the hatchery. So these are the locations along the Deerfield that we sampled. The majority of the population that we found is in the lower center area where it's actually Clesson Brook. And we also found a pretty strong population at the very far right-hand side on the property of Andy Levchuk, who's on the call, at the mouth of the Bear River. And we, as I mentioned before, the Bear River, we've been doing some work on there for to try to stabilize the banks and provide shade. So we've been doing that kind of work up there. But this stretches over 22 miles of the river. So it was, and there are 3 dams involved that separating some of these populations from each other. As far as data management, we developed a database along with Mike Hayden, and includes the information I told you about already that was recorded on the envelopes. And then we put that together with the fin samples, turned it over to Alex Satola at SUNY, that's the State University of New York in Oneonta, along with the fin samples in July of 2024. So from 2021 to 2024, we've been working on this project. And the DNA processing of the fins, Alex at SUNY Oneonta did the DNA extraction. Preparations were sent to an independent lab for processing. Alex received the results really in a short amount of time compared to the amount of time that it took us to gather the fins. And the quality of the samples was very high, according to Alex. Very good quality. So here's the results at this point. I do have a science background, but I'm not a geneticist. So this is a little bit tentative, but I'll tell you how we're going to get the word straight from the horse's mouth in a couple of months. So using a technique called ancestry-informed markers, Alex was able to discriminate between the wild and the hatchery rainbows with greater than 95% certainty. And there was little or no evidence of reproduction going on between the wild and the hatchery fish. And there was no evidence of genetic divergence with the geographic locations, even though we had 22 miles of river in between them and the presence of 3 dams that are impassable if you're going upstream. So the results, we at the end of the study, I kind of referred to this, but I didn't really explain it. We decided to do work on the brook trout and the brown trout as well. And the brown trout, although the sample size was small for the wild brown trout that we produced, once again, Alex was able to distinguish between the browns and the hatchery, the wild browns and the hatchery browns. There was once again no indication of reproductive activity between the wild and hatchery population. And as was the case with the rainbows, and this was something I didn't really mention, the rainbows, is that the AIM showed that wild populations have a greater genetic diversity than the hatchery browns. So it was very interesting to Alex, and he'd like to do some follow-up on that. So we'll see what comes of that. And then the brook trout. Once again, genetic data, there was clear distinction between the hatchery fish and the wild population. So those 3 distinct distinctions that were able to be made are really the fruit of this project. This is really the gist of it, is that we can say with certainty that we have distinct populations And the distinctions go back for years and years and years. We don't know how far back because the amount of certainty that he would be able to come up with if he tried to estimate how far back these branches diverge, say of the brook, the rainbows and the wild rainbows and the hatchery rainbows, it would be plus or minus at least 50 years. So that's pretty much the amount of time that we've had rainbows in the east, a little bit more than that. And so it's not going to be productive. But once again, genetic diversity among the wild brooks actually was found to be less than that of their counterparts from the hatchery. And that's a different story than what we were seeing with the brook trout and the rainbows. I'm sorry, the brown trout and the rainbows. We were seeing more diversity among the hatchery fish. And the result there, you can see there's actually the number of samples is kind of laid out for you right here. In the blue, you can see kind of the number of samples that we had. The sample size was small as far as the wild brook trout and the wild brown trout. So it's harder to make any kind of claims or look for any kind of trends with a small sample size like that. But it's likely that because of the sample size, we're seeing more diversity among the wild brook trout than the hatchery. So that's the study at this point. We're going to have Alex join us for a meeting, and he'll be able to give us a more clearer description of and talk more about and answer questions about the results. But I wanted to make sure that I gave you a pretty good picture of what the study looked like, how it was designed, and the work that had to go into it. I told you before, thousands of hours went into this. There are many people, outstanding people who contributed: Matt O'Donnell, Ben Letcher over at the USGS, Adam Kautzer from Fish and Wildlife, Mike Hayden. I mentioned all of them, but Matt Chipman, who's on the line, he's our vice president. Rosie Lakis, Jim Dow did a lot. Jim Hillman, Sheila Comstock used to be by another name. Ellen Jenkins, Neil Anderson, Mark Hochstetter, Jim Krupa, Dan Last, Bill O'Bear, Jason, Anthony Syak, and Andy Levchuk, who's on the call, Caleb Slater from the hatcheries, all contributed, and there are many more that I have forgotten. So I want to just move forward, just use the rest of my time to talk about upcoming events that we have, and then we can talk a little bit further if you have questions about any and all of this. But in 2 days, we have our Flies, Pies, and Lies event. That's going to be at the South Deerfield Polish Club. It goes from 10:30 to 4. Please feel free to drop by anytime. You don't have to stay for the whole thing, but bring your vise and some materials. We'll have materials there. We'll have vices to loan out if you're a beginning fly tyer or you even have never tied before and you want to try it out. It's $25 admission. We'll have giveaway prizes for like door prizes, and the $25 pays for all the pizza you can eat. It's good pizza too. And it's at the Deerfield Polish Club, so you can get cheap beers if you do that sort of thing. On the March chapter meeting, we have Jen Fair coming. She is a hydrologist over at USGS. She's going to talk about Photo Explorer, which I've explained to you if you're interested, but also talk about the temperature tolerance study that I had mentioned earlier, and then a potential joint project to monitor flows in real time. It's very exciting, something that we hopefully will be able to do. That's going to be Thursday, March 20th at 6:30 in Shelburne Falls. Anybody's welcome to come, not just members. Alex Atola is going to be our guest speaker for April. Here he is. He's the one who did the genetics for us. He's going to present his findings, and we're really excited about having him come. And we'll be talking about directions that this project might continue to grow in. A couple of directions that are in mind right now are that, like I asked Lael about the wild population up in Vermont, we didn't find the geographic diversity that we expected to find. And we want to kind of be able to establish that this population is separate from somewhere. We know that there are, on the western slope of the Berkshires, there are some wild populations. We know that there are populations that are bordering, that have streams that flow right into the Connecticut River. So we're probably going to go in that direction. We're going to have to seek funding for that. But that's one thing that we want to do. We're going to go back and revisit the idea of being able to understand how the wild rainbows use the tributaries. We'll probably do a pit tagging study. And actually, I was talking with Adam Kautza yesterday about that prospect, and it sounds like there's a real possibility that they would certainly be involved in it, and they might want to take the whole thing on. So that's exciting. And then just mining the gobs and Googleplex of data that we have already at this point. There's plenty of more that can be done. One thing that Alex is really interested in is trying to understand what's happening with the genetic diversity, the divergence that's happening in the hatcheries with the rainbows and the brown trout. And is that related to, he's looking at the ancestry markers, but is that related to genetics, the actual genes? Are they clustered around certain genes? And would that suggest something about what happens to fish that are kept in a pen and fed, and how they evolve? So that's a really interesting point. I'm not sure how that's going to, what's going to fund that either, but those are all things that are possible. More activities anticipated for 2025. We have a May chapter meeting with Brian Gilbert, who's on the line. Brian is a guide, and we also have Chris Jackson, who's a guide, on the line. So we'll get a chance to hear from them. But also, we have tree planting in late April, early May, sometime around Arbor Day. We'll have the single fly and casting rendezvous like we always do in June. The single fly will be in the very beginning of June. It's a commemorative event for Jim Garapi, who was our former president, passed away about 7 years ago. Annual dinner is going to be in August. That's been well attended and very popular and exciting, and we'll look forward to having another exciting event this year. And then we're going to do a new water quality monitoring initiative, sampling macroinvertebrates with Mike Cole. So that's where we're at.
So thanks, Eric. Are there any questions as this last slide asks among the group, or as you close out of that?
Yeah, Ellen, I have a question. It goes back to Chris Jackson's earlier question, and I know, Eric, this is oversimplifying, but if we're finding that there's not interbreeding between different genetic strains than the hatchery fish and the wild fish up at the Upper Deer, does that suggest that it really doesn't matter whether they're stocking there or not?
Well, I think there are, still other questions that actually Lael kind of addressed. One is competition for food, and just misbehavior because you don't understand the pecking order when you get introduced to the stream. So there's definitely concern about that. I think that one of the major concerns that Fish and Wildlife had was about, and the reason that they stopped the brown trout stocking at the point that they did was because they were worried that there was weakening of the genes based on interbreeding. And so, I think that in the next few months, maybe as early as next week, the Fish and Wildlife Board is going to meet the 27th, and they may have an announcement about stocking the Deerfield. We'll see what happens, but certainly they're going to have to come up with it. if they don't come up with it by that meeting, yeah, they're probably going to have to announce it by the 26th of March, which is their following board meeting. So we'll hear about all that at that point. They've taken it under advisement. There's been hearings, and we presented to them our wild trout management plan for the upper Deerfield. And included in that is cessation of stocking of rainbows. But our priority is to connect the two catch and release areas, and also look at other protections like barbless hooks that are going to probably have and we think the biggest impact is going to be when the flows finally change as a result of the relicensing of the Fife Brook Dam.
Okay, any other questions? Eric, would you like to introduce the guides that you mentioned?
Sure. Yep. So let me see if I can stop sharing my screen. So we have on the line Chris Jackson, who you've already heard from, and Brian Gilbert. Brian is from Hilltown Anglers. Chris is from Fly Fish the Deerfield. Did I get it right,
Chris
Chris?
Jackson, Fly Fishing.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Why don't you go first, Chris?
My name's Chris Jackson. I own Chris Jackson Fly Fishing. I have a couple guys working for me. I've been working on the Deerfield River since 2011. I've been guiding in total almost 23 years. So I have a high level of experience in all of the local waterways. I guide in southern Vermont, do the Walloomsac, the Beaverkill, the Hoosick, the Housatonic, the Deerfield, the Swift. So we sort of do destination fly fishing based on water conditions. Usually part of my evaluation on a day-to-day basis is just looking at flows and water conditions and trying to make the best decision for my clients. And then I feel like we have a lot of diversity in fisheries in this region. And if one particular river happens to be low, another river might have ideal conditions. And there's also hatches and stuff like that to sort of contemplate when you're planning a day with clients. So I try to do my very best crunching the data and making sure we have a safe, productive day and have fun. I mean, those are like I think those are the three benchmarks for good guiding: keeping everyone safe, having fun, and then having a productive day on the water.
Thank you.
Great. And Chris, I just want to mention that Chris is very generous with donating trips to the Deerfield chapter to help us to raise funds and flies and other things. So, and also advising us, really being our eyes on the river oftentimes. So we appreciate that. And Brian Gilbert, why don't you take it away? Good.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Nice to meet y'all. Brian Gilbert, Hilltown Anglers, as Eric mentioned. I've been guiding locally since 2016, slowly growing, and operate very much like Chris Jackson, diversified in many ways, fishing different fisheries in the area. I have a few guides that work for me, several float rafts. I do wade trips as well, and really enjoy them. But yeah, I appreciate both the presentations from Southern Vermont to you and Eric's here as well. Love to support how I can, especially in further studies. Happy to donate time as needed if available. Just appreciate everything you guys do, and try to be as supportive as possible. So please don't hesitate to reach out anytime.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks to the guides. I mean, if you notice things that you think chapters can help you with, we hope you'll speak up and let us know. So thanks for joining us tonight. So let's move on to the last, the Connecticut River Valley. Aaron, I've given you a co-host presentation, so take it away.
Cool. So for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Erin Rogers. I've been with TU probably since 2012, I think is when I first started, in mostly an internship role, and then kind of worked my way up to what is now program manager for Vermont and Massachusetts. So while the Connecticut River Valley chapter asked me to talk, I am talking about stuff that is relevant to all of your chapters. So talking about dam removal. If you're not familiar, the Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont has a really great database of data from all sorts of agencies. And that includes the Rivers Program, which monitors or at least keeps tabs on various dams throughout the region. But it would be, and while that looks like a whole lot of dams, the fun part is that this is not indeed the full picture. So when I'm looking for dams and kind of looking at dams for where, to do work, really they have very different sized impacts based on where they are in watersheds, what size of the dams they are, kind of what river processes they're either working with or working against. So even really small dams on seemingly, 8-10 foot wide streams can have an incredibly outsized impact on the water quality, on the connectivity, temperature, and even, macroinvertebrate populations that you have upstream and downstream of those dams. So really, as a cost kind of variable, small dams can really be where it's at in terms of restoration work. That, of course, gets into the sometimes tricky part of ownership of the dams. A lot of small dams aren't recorded anywhere and don't have good information on who actually owns them. A lot of times properties are, drawn boundaries along the edge of rivers. So it's sometimes digging into deeds to figure this stuff out. Sometimes it's, a bit of a game of let's divide the dam and everybody agrees to take it out. As well as the longevity and public buy-in. So the bigger the dam, oftentimes the more attached people can feel to it. If it's in a really public waterway, if it's in a really obvious spot along a roadway, a lot of people will, build that connection, regardless of if they have any like actual ownership to it or anything else. And that can be a really tricky piece to kind of get around. So kind of back to that full picture thing, Vermont has a dams database, Massachusetts has a dams database, but they miss a lot too. Basically, all the dams that I'm going to be talking about in the following slides aren't reflected on this map, or the ones that are in Massachusetts aren't on any of the Massachusetts maps. They are not part of anybody's state jurisdiction or oversight. They just kind of exist unknown on the landscape. And we, over the years, various partners and I have started calling them ghost dams because nobody knows where they are or when they're going to appear on somebody's radar. Oftentimes I will have somebody who's, been out walking a stream, fishing, come across one in the wild, take a picture, just be like, hey, did you know this was here? And I'm like, no, but I'd love to. And it can be tough to add dams that we just find into state databases. So keeping tabs on them ourselves, again, is a pretty productive way to kind of keep going about that. So I'll start with some of the dams that I've taken out in the recent years. And this covers, areas throughout all 3 chapters. So over in Dorset, we finally wrapped up an extensive 8-year project addressing multiple barriers, some dams, some culverts on the Meadowy River, up in the headwaters, basically between where it kind of gets into the town of Dorset and where the headwaters are up in the Green Mountain National Forest. So this is the Wallace Dam, which this was actually not, you can see my mouse. This wasn't even the primary part of the dam. The primary spillway was way over here. And so this is just basically a sidewall that extended over 150 feet. And we actually never even came across the end. We kind of hit a point where we were like, we can stop digging now. But the river had kind of filled in with sediment all behind this dam. And at some point had carved this kind of flood chute. The river naturally was flowing down through here, but then before this kind of became exposed, made a 90-degree turn and then another 90-degree turn to get over the proper spillway. So we basically notched this out and took this section down to maintain the historic spillway per the landowner's request, and kind of redirected the flow, the majority of the flow. There is still a part of the flow that comes out over that spillway, but the majority of the flow now comes right through that old section. Just a little bit downstream of there was the Reynolds Dam. So again, purpose of it, nobody knew. It actually wasn't on anybody's deeds, but at least the deed of this landowner on this side of the river, his property boundary was dictated as being on the far side, so we didn't have to divide it between that landowner and the landowner on the opposite bank. But one of the fun things we found here was that there were actually two dams about 50 feet apart from each other, almost exactly the same. So where this one was located about where I'm standing in this photo, the second one, you can see the abutments of it way up here. So a pair of dams that both have been removed at this point. Up in Salisbury, so this is the Otter Creek drainage. This is the Wainwright Dam that was taken out last year. And this was largely done by one of our partnering organizations, the Vermont Natural Resource Council. We actually came in and did a bunch of in-stream habitat work behind it. So doing post-assisted log jams and beaver dam analogs to kind of help with sediment control and help rebuild some of the habitat that comes from releasing a very extensive reservoir in this case. Kind of slightly out of order. This was the third one that was on the Meadowy in terms of a dam, posing an interesting challenge of the landowner's bridge sat on top of the dam. So in order to take out this dam, we had to take out and replace their entire bridge in the process. So really increasing the cost there, but absolutely worth it, as this was very much a bridge in need of replacement as well. Getting down into Massachusetts, down in Chester, as part of the Wild and Scenic Westfield. This was the Stroud Dam. The bridge not quite over top of the dam, but close enough that we still needed to do some work on the bridge in order to keep the landowner happy and to take out the dam. A lot of times, dam removals end up with a lot of compromise and sometimes some extra cost to make that all go. But a really lovely, productive stream. We've done additional culvert work upstream of here as well. But this was another one that we had identified the culverts as being a priority, and it was only after we had started looking at those culverts that we're like, there's a dam downstream. We should probably take that one out too. And so yeah, these small private ghost dams just kind of pop up all sorts of places. And so now we kind of get into some of the dams that I will be working on over the next few years. Down in Pownell, Vermont, on a tributary to the North Branch, or a tributary to the Hoosick. If you've fished on the Hoosick, you're probably familiar with the outflow of Broad Brook. This is up towards the headwaters of it, right before it enters into the Green Mountain National Forest. So Broad Brook and then a very close by tributary, James Brook, are actually on a parcel owned by the town of North Adams, which is just over in Massachusetts, and this was part of their waterworks. They don't use it as a waterworks anymore. So now they kind of sit, not doing a lot. And for the size of these dams, they still weren't on anybody's database, which is, continues to surprise me. This is, you know, a maybe 8 foot high, 45 feet across. You know, this one's maybe 6 or 7 feet high. And while the concrete portion's only about 25 feet across, the earthen part of it actually extends a good long way out to that side bank there. So these are two projects that are tentatively moving forward. They were previously funded by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services National Fish Passage Program, which has been frozen. So that is on hold. On the east branch of the North River, so a part of the Deerfield watershed, we're working with, this is a privately owned dam by the Olitsky Foundation, which is an artist foundation. This used to be a basin dam, so it's basically not particularly high, but it is very long. It's about a 15-foot long concrete basin set in the river that used to supply their sprinkler system for their storage building. They have since gotten a different type of water source to you know, have reliable water for their sprinkler systems. So now this one just kind of hangs out, and we're working with them to design the removal and riparian restoration through here. Jack's Brook over in Dover, Vermont, so tributary to the North Branch of the Deerfield. Another not particularly large, and we just happened to know the landowner, and they said, "Oh yeah, you know, I've got a dam in my backyard. Want to take that one out?" To which the answer is always yes. It's not doing really much of anything other than holding back a whole lot of sediment. So we'll be going in this summertime and removing that from the river. Also in the Deerfield, we have Binney Brook, and this is a great example of one of those dams that a chapter member happened to be walking up this stream, looking for good places to fish, and said, you know, took a picture, texted it to me, and said, "Hey, do you know about this one?" And I'm like, "No, but I'd like to." So this one is actually owned by the Chimney Hill Homeowners Association. And so we've been trying to work with them and get a good response on whether they would like us to take it out or whether they would just let us take it out, even if they don't have any particularly strong feelings one way or the other. So that one's a work in progress for sure. And then down in Massachusetts, also on the Hoosick, on the North Branch of the Hoosick here, this is one of the bigger dams that we are absolutely working on, both as a water quality and primarily a safety issue at this point. You can see this was a picture taken back in July of 2022, and then there were a couple of severe storms, like there are every year seemingly. And then by 1 year later, we have all sorts of old timber cribbing. All of these, you know, 30-foot chunks of concrete are now sitting downstream of the apron on the far side of a bridge, on a very major traveled throughway. So it's coming down one way or the other, and we're just trying to help control that removal, to keep it as safe and as, you know, we don't need all of this sudden flush, you know, moving down into the flood chutes that are in North Adams. So this is definitely one of the bigger ones, and again, was previously funded through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife National Fish Passage Program. So we're working on trying to figure out alternatives to that one because it will remove itself if nothing else. Just upstream, so basically just upstream, right around that edge of the photo there, is Hudson Brook, where there are a couple more small dams. And luckily, the landowner that owns this dam also owns these two dams. So he is absolutely interested in taking out all three. We were going to prioritize the Beaver Mill Dam, but being two smaller dams, these might actually end up being more cost effective and might be able to come out faster, now that we're having to start from a baseline of of the Beaver Mill Dam again. And that kind of gets to both the questions and a kind of a request for assistance for all of you. You know, we do a lot of dam work and a lot of culvert work, a lot of infrastructure work throughout southern Vermont and western Massachusetts, which are priority waters for us. You know, we want to do a lot of work. We want to make these waters the best we can. And a lot of the funding for those types of projects, because they are expensive, has come from federal funds. If not wholly, then a majority of it. And now a lot of projects are going to sit and wait for a very undetermined amount of time. So I have had to pivot some of my work and do way more legislative work than I've ever had to do before as a biologist, like not my comfort zone. But as citizens, you know, it's always great to call your senator, to call your congresspeople, and to say, this is directly impacting things that I care about. And we would really like to see more action, more activity, more, you know, strength in trying to get these funds unfrozen. So that's my tiny pitch for you all. And we at TU National have even, you know, phone scripts, email scripts. So whatever you feel comfortable with in terms of, you know, communication methods, we can help. So I'd love to hear from you if you're interested in doing that. But otherwise, if you have any other questions about dams, let me know.
Thanks, Aaron. Go
I have
ahead.
a quick question, Aaron.
Yeah.
When you remove the dam, I know that sediment control or you know, being able to release the sediment appropriately or take the sediment out is a big concern, and there's all this permitting and stuff. But I was just curious, it occurred to me, what happens with like the concrete? Is that something that really is an asset in the river, or is it something that is better to be removed and put on the bank, or what? How do we work with that?
So that usually goes to a safe disposal site. We don't go to the lengths of testing all the concrete that we use, but it usually has enough rebar in it, and you know, depending on the age, that it's a far better thing to get just out of the river entirely. And then we end up doing additional in-stream habitat wood, trying to integrate large wood as much as we can to create good habitat features. But the concrete is not a great resource for that one.
So, Aaron, if I heard you correctly, you were saying that oftentimes the smallest dams are the most impactful or the best ones to take out. And maybe I missed it, but what are the why do you say that in terms of small versus large? What are the factors?
So a lot of the larger dams are on, you know, primary waterways, on the kind of the downstream ends of things where you don't have strong populations and you've already got a lot of warming going on, so that
Got it.
It absolutely does help. But the small dams on small rivers, the footprint of warming is a lot more extensive. And also is, you know, as soon as you take it out, you immediately see the change, which is really nice. It's like instant gratification for your stream communities.
Okay. And so one of the questions I had was with about the sediment that settles up above dams is that has to be removed. Are there toxic heavy metals or other things in that are concerning? What are the concerns about removing the sediment that's developed?
Yeah, so we always do a sediment sample to make sure, and we do we send them away to a lab that does kind of comprehensive testing on those and looks for if there is anything that we need to be concerned about. Smaller dams, if there is not as much sediment built up behind them, then we can actually release that downstream, because that sediment should be in the river anyway. It's not like it's coming from outside sources and
Right.
pooling there. It's stuff that's naturally moving through. So downstream of dams, you usually have what are called sediment starved sections where it gets to be really bouldery because all of those smaller, finer materials are caught up behind the dam. So again, when possible and when safe to do so and when it's permissible, we will let that sediment naturally go down. And again, that's where those kind of in-stream kind of woody features can really do a lot to kind of retain a lot of that sediment in that sediment starved section and kind of build that bed back up and create some really good in-stream habitat that the fish can utilize right away.
Thanks. Are there other questions for Aaron? If not, is there any are there any other guides that are with us tonight that haven't spoken up that would like to introduce themselves and say a few words? I don't recognize any from our area, but I could be wrong. Okay. Any other questions or comments that anyone like to make before we close?
I'd like to say, great work, everybody.
Thanks, Lyle. You do great work too. And again, she's a great speaker. I just put in a plug there. She's really brings them in.
We will keep that in mind, right, Randy?
I think your last one, Eric, was I just had a schedule conflict, so I do get booked up.
Yeah. Okay, well, we finished pretty close to our end time, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And I think this is a good way to spend a winter night without having to drive home at this time. So look forward to hopefully seeing you next year. And thanks to everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Eric.